Hi, this is Jason Keogh. Welcome to another Tachyon Tuesday. And as always, we're following up a blog with a vlog. Now, unusually, this is going to be the start of a series of vlogs because the blog last week was about extending Tachyon, and extending Tachyon is not something we can cover in one little vlog session. So it's going to be one blog with the topic being extending Tachyon, rippling through into several different vlogs. And the reason there's several different vlogs is that Tachyon is so powerful when it comes to extending it. As a platform, it is something that enables multiple different approaches. So this one's going to talk about what is the art of the possible. Where are you limited? The short version is that you're limited by your imagination only. But when you're extending Tachyon, there are options as to what you do, right? One option is you run scale. Now, scale is, it actually stands for simple cross-platform agent language for extensibility. It really is quite simple. It has a host of shortcuts essentially to enable you to do interesting things to devices and to check interesting things about devices. So, understand processes and performance and files and users and all sorts of different stuff. So that's what scale can do. And we'll talk through that. Critically, scale runs inside this application called TIMS. And I think in the blog, I left a link to where you can go and download TIMS and indeed to a reference guide for scale. But we'll actually have a dedicated vlog on scale and setting up with TIMS and getting going. But, sometimes there's something that scale cannot do, believe it or not. And it's always good to have options. So a lot of times, you might want to break out, maybe within the scale, break out and run an OS command. So any command that can be run on an OS that Tachyon runs on, so Windows and Linux and Solaris and all sorts of different OSs, you can run their native OS commands. And indeed, you can run scripts, so PowerShell scripts on Windows, for example, or Bash scripts or whatever. If the device is capable of running it, you can trigger that with Tachyon. Now, we actually really prefer sticking to scale wherever possible. And one of the reasons for that is that it's much, much faster. If you try and do something in PowerShell, you've got to load up a PowerShell environment on the endpoint. You've got to load that script into it. That PowerShell environment is probably going to talk to WMI to get some data. Tachyon, the agent sits far more close to the OS. Essentially, if you do, for example, operating system.get processes in Tachyon, that's going to go to the hook in the OS that makes that available. It's going to talk to it using C++. So it's going to be this direct connection, and it's much faster than starting up WMI to ask it. And I mean that even programmatically. I'm not talking about, like Tachyon is already running on the device. It's executing an OS call. It's incredibly fast. It's typically, to perform a function, it's typically about 100 times faster than PowerShell. Now, when you take into account that function might just be 1 or 2 milliseconds in scale, that means it's 100 or 200 milliseconds in PowerShell. That doesn't sound like it's very, very slow. But the fact is that inside of one process, or one thing you're trying to do, you might be calling 20, 30, 40, 50 different functions. So now you've got something that executes inside a Tachyon in 400 milliseconds and takes 7-8 seconds to run in PowerShell. Doesn't sound like a lot. Trust me, when you're doing it against 100,000 devices, it can be a lot. Also, scale is guaranteed to work when you have a Tachyon agent on the device. You do need that agent there, obviously, but you won't be running Tachyon if you don't. So scale is going to work on those devices, whereas PowerShell, as you're probably aware, can have some issues. Now, one of the great things with Tachyon is that you can embed those PowerShell scripts, and you're downloading and executing those PowerShell scripts locally onto the endpoint. So there is a bandwidth issue, if you will, with PowerShell rather, that isn't there with scale, but it's a consideration. But you are more likely to have successful execution of your PowerShell scripts using Tachyon than you are just using PowerShell, especially if you're trying to use PowerShell remoting. Okay, but ultimately you can also take any third-party executable and run it using Tachyon. So you can embed not just a script or a command, but a third-party binary. You can embed that into your Tachyon instruction, deploy it to the endpoints using Tachyon, and execute that embedded exe. So we're going to be treating each one of these well, maybe not native OS commands. We might wrap that into the scale one, but we're going to be treating these with their own vlogs. And then essentially what you do is you put that together and then you parse the results in scale, which is essentially using SQL, by the way. So if you know SQL, you'll already be well on the way. So you parse the results, and then the reaction to that particular scale or OS command or script or exe can drive a reaction, right? So I ran this thing, it came back with that result. That means I then went on and did something else, okay? So when you're extending Tachyon, you're also going to be creating product packs. We call them integrated product packs, sometimes, or IPPs. And product packs essentially are made up of instructions which are executed inside of Explorer or inside of ServiceNow, perhaps, as typically executed by a human at a point in time against one or more machines to drive a specific result. Or you'll be running guaranteed state policies. Now, instructions are of one of two types, either a question or an action. A question will return results and won't do anything, and an action does something. That's the difference between them. Policies contain rules, and rules come in two variants. They come in either check rules or fix rules, and they have what we call fragments, and rules are built out of fragments. So a fragment can be a precondition, only run this rule if this is true. A check that this is so, and if it is, pass or fail, or a fix. And a fix is, if the check fails, then go forward and do a fix. So ultimately, rules are of two types, check or fix, and are made up of fragments, which are preconditions, checks, and fixes. Okay, so it's taken me nearly 7 minutes to explain just this. In next week's session, we're going to be starting to look at TIMs and scale and getting started with that. Okay, do check out the blog with the links to download TIMs, with the links to an introduction to scale, that sort of documentation that's available on help.oney.com. But in the meantime, hopefully this helps lay out what it is that we're going to be doing and what it is that you can do with Tachyon from a very high level perspective. We'll speak to you next week.